Express, Todd Vanderheyden, June the 27th, Wednesday.
That's right. And I'm Amanda Blitz. And now we want to focus on world markets, where investors are waiting and watching as a two-day summit of the European Union gets underway tomorrow in Brussels. Leaders of all 27 EU nations are trying to find the way out of the ongoing economic crisis.
Of course, a big task ahead for them. Phil Giurlando is a European politics expert with Queen's University, standing by in our studios in Toronto. Phil, two countries everybody is going to be watching, of course, France and Germany. Their conflict goes way beyond austerity versus stimulus into questions of sovereignty and how much more Europe do they actually want. Give us a little bit of a primer on that.
Sure. Their fundamental conflict is over how much sovereignty to give to Brussels, over national budgets, because this crisis has become a crisis of confidence in banks and in sovereigns. Investors are panicking, and they want to see moves that will restore confidence. And one of the moves that many are talking about is the establishment of a banking union or Eurobonds, which would essentially make German taxpayers liable for the deposits and debts of European countries. But Germany is saying that it will not put its economic power behind deposits and debts unless there is a political union. And a political union would mean that Brussels would essentially have authority over national budgets. And French foreign policy for at least the past 25 years has been to resist any further concessions of sovereignty to Brussels. So that is the fundamental conflict. How much sovereignty to give to Brussels?
But what can we realistically expect from this meeting? Because there are reports that leaders will discuss creating a banking union. So what could that mean? Well,
a full banking union is politically impossible.
Why?
Because it would make German taxpayers liable for the deposits of savers in Italy and Spain. And even if Merkel herself agreed with that, and she doesn't, she wouldn't have the political legitimacy to do that. The majority of Germans would utterly reject that idea. And she is constrained by that. These political constraints really give her little room for maneuver. Now, there are half-hearted, say, attempts at banking union. One of those would be to create a common regulator, that is a authority that would have the power to regulate all banks in the Eurozone. Right now, banks are very national in the rules for everything from insurance schemes. Anyway, they want to create one at the European level. But this still would not go all the way. All the way would mean an insurance deposit scheme, and that is it's politically impossible. There's no political support for that.
Phil, tell us a little bit about two other countries now coming into sharper focus. We have Cyprus, very tiny country in the Mediterranean that needs a bailout, and also more and more focus on Italy as well. Might be in a lot of trouble, might need a bailout. Where do things stand with those two?
Well, I wouldn't worry too much about Cyprus. It's a small country, it has about 1 million people, very small GDP. Its banks were are highly exposed to Greek debt, and so they need to be recapitalized. Its bailout will be about 10 billion euros, which is manageable in a Eurozone that has a GDP of 13 or 14 trillion euros. Italy is the country to worry about because it is simply too big to bail out. It's, people often say banks are too big to fail. Italy is too big to bail out because its financing needs in the event of a bailout would be anywhere from 600 to 800 billion euros. And those resources are simply not there. So if Italy were to need a bailout, they would, the only institution that could intervene at that point would be the European Central Bank, the ECB. It would have to be a lender of last resort, but this goes against the treaties. It's not allowed to be a lender of last resort. When the Eurozone was agreed to, this was one of the fundamental principles that Germany would not budge on, would not allow the ECB to be a lender of last resort like the Federal Reserve is in the US. So that is the big question, whether if Italy needs a bailout, whether other European institutions will intervene.
Phil, we've heard that this meeting coming up in Brussels Thursday and Friday has been described as a make or break moment, but I feel like it's a broken record because I think we've heard that for the last 21 meetings or however many there have been. But let's look positive at least. I mean, can we expect any short-term results from this summit that will positively impact world markets?
Well, there is a proposal floating around coming from Mario Monti, the Prime Minister of Italy. This proposal would allow the current bailout fund to buy Italian debt in secondary markets. And the logic is, if it were to do that, its interest rates would go down. Because what everybody is afraid about, I would even say terror. Not if they don't fear. There's a terror that Italy's interest rates will exceed, on its 10-year bonds, will exceed 7%. Because if they exceed 7%, that will be a signal that its debt is unsustainable and it will need a bailout. So a short-term, politically plausible solution might be to allow the bailout fund to intervene in secondary markets to try to ensure that its interest rates on its debt do not past that psychological threshold of 7%. But then this raises the question of whether it will work. So they might announce it, but then, like all the other 20 conferences or summits that have happened, markets are initially calmed down, and then two or three days later, they read the details and they realize that it's toothless, and they panic again. So.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Phil Giurlando is a European politics expert with Queen's, coming to us in our studios downtown Toronto to help us put some sense of these EU summits. They are never ending and they are continuing tomorrow. Thanks, Phil, for your time.
Phil.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And coming up on Express.